Mr. Clerk, please record.
There is a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Do you have any items for the record?
Mr. President, I do. I have a reference report referring Legislative Bill 1196 through 1301 plus 3 constitutional amendments. In addition to that, I have an amendment, proposed rules change number 4 from Senator Erdman. That's all I have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We will proceed to the first item of this afternoon's agenda, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, under consideration was proposed rules change number 19 when the body recessed for lunch. Under consideration was an amendment from Senator Wishart. I understand she wants to withdraw that and instead offer a second amendment. Okay, Senator Wishart.
Senator Wishart, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I am withdrawing the amendment that I originally drafted and replacing it just with a clarifying word. So I'll read it to you since we'll be getting a copy around, but it's of the same spirit, just a confirmation that ex officio member means a non-voting member. So to read this rule, it's Rule 8, Section 4, addressing standing committee chairperson as ex officio member. The chairperson of a standing committee or designee of the standing committee chairperson may serve as an ex officio member, that's a non-voting member of the Appropriations Committee, during hearings for review of state agency board and commission budget requests when those agency boards or commissions are reasonably encompassing in the standing committee's subject matter jurisdiction. And one other clarification I want to make is the word may serve as an ex officio member that's non-voting means that it is at the discretion of the chair of the Appropriations Committee to invite that chair or the appointed person to join in the Appropriations Committee hearing. So I wanted to clarify that. Colleagues, again, this morning in the discussion that we had, it became clear to me that there is an opportunity to remove what I am sensing is a silo that goes on in terms of the appropriations process and some of the subject matter expertise in committees. And I do understand that this may already be an opportunity to exist without a rules change, but want to be clear with all of you that sometimes with rules, it's not about setting limitations or telling ourselves what to do. It's also about explaining what we can do. And so putting this into our rules gives future legislators a better understanding of an opportunity for more collaboration within committees, and in particular, in this case, with the Appropriations Committee and other subject matter expertise. I think there are benefits for this rule change for both the Appropriations Committee and for the Subject Matter Expertise Committee. For the Appropriations Committee, it is important for us to be able to have individuals who are sitting in and able to ask agencies the questions that we may not think to ask. You know, our main focus is on passing our constitutionally obligated balanced budget every year. And it is important that we are closely collaborating with subject matter expertise on how that budget is going to align with the policies that we're looking to achieve that session as well. So I see this as a learning opportunity for the Appropriations Committee to kind of eliminate one of those silos that exists. And then I also see this as an opportunity and a learning experience for the subject matter expertise as well. Often we are a committee that oftentimes we joke is, you know, we're all in this sort of room. It's a 5-day experience. this is our only focus. And sometimes you don't get that line of sight to what we do and the detail and attention we spend and the questions and conversations we have with agencies every single day as we're crafting our budget. So I see this as an opportunity, an educational opportunity for other senators, and in particular chairs and leaders of committees, to sit in and witness what we are doing every day, in particular around the area that they are focused on leading. So colleagues, I know there isn't a lot of time for you to review this, but I encourage you to consider voting for this amendment to the rules, and I would be happy to answer any questions off the mic if you have any, or on the mic if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senators, Senator Dorn has a guest under the north balcony, Emily Axby from Claytonia. Will you stand and welcome her? Thank you. Senator McKinney, you are recognized next to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise, I don't know if I support it yet. And the reason why is because it reads the chairperson of a standing committee or a designee of the standing committee chairperson may serve as an ex officio. I personally believe it should be shall, because it shouldn't be at the discretion of the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee to invite. It should be shall. If we're gonna pass this, it should be required for multiple reasons. Number one, we might not have the same appropriation, well, we won't forever have the same appropriations chair, and you get somebody that doesn't want to invite somebody, they don't have to. So it should be shall. Also, I'm curious of what reasonably means in this context of saying commissions are reasonably encompassed in the jurisdiction. Like, who makes the determining factor of what reasonably means? If a budget request touches the prisons in this example, then the chair of the Judiciary Committee should be there. It shouldn't be, we shouldn't have to do word gymnastics to try to figure out should they be there or shouldn't they be there. I believe may should be changed to shall, and we just should say if the budget request touches the jurisdiction of the committee. Then I would be more in support of this amendment change. It's nothing against Senator Wishart. I thank her for bringing the amendment. I just think this needs a little more teeth. We need to make sure that no matter what, if the Department of Punitive Services requests something for their budget or to build a prison, that the Judiciary Chair is there, and it's not up to the committee chair of the Appropriations Committee to invite them. It should be automatic. It shouldn't be left up to the discretion of the chair. So if we change may to shall and just say, if the budget request touches the jurisdiction of the committee, I think it's a better amendment. I don't think we should have may or reasonably, because who is defining what is reasonable and what is not reasonable? And it was just interesting earlier how nobody voted for my amendment. I really wasn't surprised. Honestly, I wasn't, but it just proves something that, when we say we care about property tax relief, when we say we care about, the taxpayers and how we're spending dollars, when it comes to corrections, well, it's not corrections, it's punitive services. When it comes to them, nobody cares. They get a blank check. It's just a black hole to spend money to not do anything positive, but to incarcerate people and not help them out. And then they come back, and then the Department of Punitive Services come back to build another prison because we spent millions of dollars not doing something to improve people. That's what we're doing. So when you say you care about taxpayer dollars and property tax relief, please say with the exception of money going to corrections, no punitive services. So that's all I have. I'm open to the discussion here, but I think that may should be shall.
1 minute.
And we should just strike out reasonably encompass and just say in the standing committee's subject matter jurisdiction. Who is defining what is reasonable? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. I stand in support of this for a couple reasons. One, I think it's important that we are trying to react to the conversation that we had previously and figure out some way of a pathway forward. So one way, this is why I think I support this more, is because this isn't just confined to one agency. This would allow for a chairperson of a standing committee or designee to serve as that ex officio non-voting member for a review of state agency, board, or commission budget requests, which would be more expensive because I think that there's times where, let's say, for example, we're dealing with more funding for foster care review office, then HHS would be able to have an individual or the chair of HHS actually be in committee and be asking questions on regards to some things that they would have some subject matter expertise and information on. And it wouldn't be only confined to one agency. And there are many different things. I think, for like example, like the pardons board, like this would allow the chair of judiciary or a designee to also be part of a conversation we're dealing with the budget related to who's coming and testifying for each of these different committees or agencies or different standing committees. And so I think it's really important that this is actually a little bit broader in that regard. I support it, I think, both with the may and the shall. The may being that it allows the chairperson of the standing committee to be able to make that designee. But I think that this is a reasonable step in the right direction, even if it's may or it shall, because it is expanding and it's not just focused on one specific item, but instead creating a practice that can be applied across all different circumstances so that there's line of sight with the subject matter committee chairs or their designee, along with the appropriations committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon. So I listened to the discussion on this issue, and this is Senator Wishart's second try at this. Just so you know, this morning, Senator Brewer withdrew a bill because that bill was exactly the same as the current statute reads. So Senator Brewer's bill was to give hunting privileges to veterans that were 50% disabled, and that's what the current statute reads. So he withdrew that. This amendment does exactly what we're already allowed to do now. So the committee chairman can invite people to be part of that committee's hearing. It's at their discretion. So why do we need to change the rule and write it down when it's already something we can do? I have a suggestion. Why don't we do this? So you make sure that every chairman of every rule, a chairperson of every rules committee understands, or the standing committees understand they have the authority to do this. Why don't we have a little training session when we start with new committee chairmen and explain to them, you have this opportunity, this is in the rules, and you can do this. That seems to make a lot more sense than changing a rule. So maybe you've concluded from my comments how I'm going to vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I rise in support of Senator Wishart's amendment to this proposed rule. I generally agree with Senator McKinney's comments that should be shall as opposed to may, but I think a step in the right direction is always an improvement, and I appreciate Senator Wishart's work on this. And I would go back to kind of my comments from the first day of rules, conversations, and debate, as that it's good that we're having these conversations and kind of teasing things out and and getting an understanding of what the implications of some of these things are, what problems we see, and then working in an iterative process to get to a better spot. And this proposal from Senator Wishart, which I think is a good idea, came about because of Senator McKinney's comments and then Senator McKinney's proposal that we had a vote on and the conversation that rose out of that, and then the trying to find a workable solution that would at least help or in some respects address what Senator McKinney was talking about. It obviously doesn't go far enough, but it does create a opportunity to get that subject matter expertise when the Appropriations Committee is discussing certain areas, and it gives the opportunity for the committees, the subject matter committees, to see into the appropriations process, to ask questions of folks who might not otherwise show up, and to report back to the rest of us who are on the outside. Because to a lot of us, the appropriations process is very opaque. And when the budget gets reported out, that's the first time we're hearing about a lot of things. Things come up on the floor and people are surprised that something's in the budget, or people are surprised that something's not in the budget. And then, that doesn't exactly go over well when other people feel like they've been frozen out of a process. And I think this provides an opportunity for a little transparency in the process and allows to have somebody, then the subject matter committee, either chair or their designee, would be able to go and observe and have those conversations and know something about where the Appropriations Committee is at and be able to report back to their committee and others about what's going on there. So I think it does serve a two-way function that really would strengthen the process. I like the change to clarify the ex officio non-voting member. I appreciate that. I think that's really important that we be specific about so that if we do have somebody else sitting on appropriations, they're not going to be able to vote on that section of the budget. They're just there to ask questions and observe. And so I appreciate that clarification. And I understand some of the folks whose hesitance is to adopt a change like this, but I do think that it would be a positive to the budgetary process and to the drafting of legislation process, because the information that committee members from, say, Judiciary could derive from sitting in on that budget for the Department of Corrections, they bring back to all the other conversations in the Judiciary Committee. They bring the information from Judiciary to Appropriations, but they bring back the Appropriations conversation and context and information to Judiciary as Judiciary is considering those bills. So it would be overall a net positive to both how we appropriate and how we legislate on these complicated issues. So I support Senator Wishart's proposal. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do also rise in support of Senator Wishart's amendment here. I don't think we have to belabor all the points of why this is beneficial. I've spoken about that before. I would just, I guess, respectfully disagree with Senator Erdman's characterization of this modification being a duplicate of what currently is in place. I think what he was saying, if I'm interpreting it right, and I don't want to put words in Senator Erdman's mouth, is that currently the committee may allow whomever they want to come in and sit if they want to. What I believe this rule does is enshrine the right of the chairperson for another standing committee to come in and sit in that appropriations committee as an ex officio non-voting member if it's of their subject matter. So rather than it being a permissive thing that the appropriations committee may allow if they want it, this would allow the chairperson of another standing committee the opportunity to do that if they so choose, regardless of whether or not the appropriations committee says yay or nay. And so I think what this does is it more or less supports the rights of the chairs of other committees to then sit in on the Appropriations Committee hearing if it's within their wheelhouse. And so I don't believe, based on my reading of this rule and what our current practice is, that it's duplicative. I think that it does go beyond what is current practice and with regard to what's enshrined in the rules. And I do support it for that reason. I think that ensuring that, for example, the chairperson of Judiciary would have the opportunity to come in and sit in the appropriations hearings with regards to capital construction or other budgetary requests for DCS, I think is vital, just to ensure they have the opportunity to ask questions. I know that sometimes in the Appropriations Committee, there are some questions asked with regard to policy, underlying policy, instead of just budgetary questions. But I think that ensuring a chairperson from the underlying committee, the subject matter committee, is there, it would permit that opportunity to inquire deeper with regard to policy and perspectives, as opposed to just keeping it more that budgetary conversation. In addition to that, the chairperson would then have the opportunity to perhaps gather questions from their committee prior to coming in and having the conversation with the Appropriations Committee at the hearing. And it would also allow them to then turn around and share with their own committee the information that was heard at that committee hearing for appropriations. So, I would agree with what Senator Vargas and Senator John Kavanaugh said. I think it's a step in the right direction. Certainly, I think we could go a little bit further with regards to having that sort of joint hearing, as we discussed previously. I think that Senator McKinney talked about that making a lot of sense. But I really appreciate Senator Wishart's willingness here to, I think, drill down to what the underlying concern is and try to find ways to address those concerns within the structure of what we currently have without upending the entire system, but still making sure that the concerns of chairpersons from various subject matter committees may be heard. So I do support this amendment. I think this is a friendly amendment, obviously, that's just trying to get to the heart of what the rule is actually addressing. And I look forward to hearing my colleagues further discuss the necessity of having subject matter experience and experts weigh in on these hearings. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I sit here and I wonder, why are we so hesitant to hold people accountable who are in charge of the lives of other individuals? Why are we so afraid to ask questions? Because we don't want to offend people that maybe come before a committee for just asking simple questions. What did you do with the money? How did it work? What were the outcomes? What were the pros and what were the cons? How can it be improved? What are you doing now? What is wrong with asking those questions? The only people that would be offended are the people who are not doing their job and trying to hide. And that is a fact. If you're doing your job, you should be willing to answer those questions. What are you doing with the money that we set aside for this? How did it work? Did you have positive outcomes? Did you have negative outcomes? What is wrong with that? This is why the chairperson of a standing committee or his or her designee should be sitting there and should be there. I would love for the full committee to sit there in a joint hearing. That would probably be more ideal, but considering the other vote, I don't think this body has the will to do that. But I do believe this may should be shall. We talk about the institution, we talk about things changing, making sure things are right going forward. Leaving may here allows for the possibility of us or this body ignoring more rules in the future. Because as we learned earlier, we are definitely ignoring some rules in the rule book. So this should be shall. It should be automatic. That is a simple change to just change may to shall. And also just strike this reasonably encompass and just say in the standing committee's jurisdiction. I know it's probably an uphill battle to get those changes because there's not a lot of willingness to make this change or any change to hold agencies accountable for failing to utilize taxpayer dollars in the best way and to continue to come down here and ask for money to do nothing but house people. They're not improving lives, they're just being punitive. We currently have a problem where there isn't any oversight in any of these institutions. It's just the Department of Punitive Services just telling us what's happening, unless we go in and see it for ourselves. The ombudsman can't get in there. The OIG isn't allowed in there. Who's watching them? Who's asking the tough questions? This is why this rule change is needed, but we have to make sure it is an automatic situation. Anytime they ask for money, the chair of the Judiciary Committee or his or hers designee should be allowed at those hearings. It shouldn't be up to the appropriations chair. I'm firmly against that. You're not going to change my mind. I might even vote for this amendment if it go up for a vote, because that may should be shall. And reasonably encompassed should be striked as well. We got to stop trying to be PC around here. We dealing with real lives and real situations. We signed up for this to make tough decisions and do things for the best interests of the state and our constituents. It's not to be PC to the people in the governor's mansion or the people down these hallways or these people in these agencies. Let's step up and do the right thing. I'm tired of trying to be PC around here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Clements, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rise in opposition of the amendment. Appreciate Senator Wishart's attempt to provide some clarification, but the wording isn't really necessary in my opinion. The rules that we have already allow this. It is something that's new that hasn't been used in my experience, but I earlier stated that if a chair of another committee is interested in coming in on a hearing that's in their subject matter, I'm willing to discuss that. And I like Senator Erdman's suggestion that standing committee chair training be done so that the committee chairmen know that they have a possibility of requesting to sit in on a hearing that's in their jurisdiction. We do have standing committee meetings about monthly. The speaker has been already leading those and is going to continue that. And it'd be fine with me if he would make it known that this is a possibility. There is one shortcoming with this. In a short session, we only review agencies that have a budget change request. And so if Senator Wayne wanted to come in on a corrections hearing, there may not be one this session. Long session, there would be. So it's not going to be available all the time. Excuse me. And so I think that the rules, I'm satisfied with the current rule the way it is, and that it already allows for this situation, and I am not in support of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. See no other names in the queue. Senator Wishart, you are recognized to close.
Thank you. Well, I think this has been a good discussion and debate, and appreciate the different views that my colleagues have. A couple of follow-up points to this. One is that, again, just because there is currently a tradition of having the opportunity to do something, in this case, for the appropriations chair to invite another standing committee chair into a hearing, doesn't mean that that isn't something that we should then enshrine and codify in our rules to be able to educate then future senators on the opportunity and tool they have available there. In fact, the last couple of days, some of the discussions and rules that we voted on have been rules in which the argument was that this has been the tradition of how we have been operating, and now we want to put this in our rules to enshrine that tradition of how we're operating in our rules. And so I see this as a similar opportunity. Secondly, I do think that it is important for us as a body to remove as many silos as possible. In my experience in life, working in this legislature and outside of the legislature, where you see issues happen is when people are siloed. When people are not talking to each other, when they're not experiencing what the other person is experiencing. And I think this is one small opportunity for us to take what can currently exist, codify it into our rules, and incentivize individuals and committees collaborating with each other. So again, colleagues, I encourage you to consider voting for this rule change, and thank you for a good discussion today.
Thank you, Senator. The question before us is the vote on amendments to the permanent rules proposed by Rule Change 19, brought by Senator Wishart. All in favor, vote aye. Opposed, vote nay. All those who voted wish to, please record.
10 ayes, 23 nays on the adoption of the amendment to the proposed rules change.
The amendment is not adopted. Returning to debate on the proposed rule change, Senator Arch. Senator Arch, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we will now be voting on Rule Change 19 as drafted and as presented. And just a reminder that this clarifies what the appropriations bills are and then adds two bills that will follow them on the floor but not change any referencing to that. And I would appreciate a yes vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one in the queue, we will be voting on the amendment to the permanent rules change proposed by Senator Arch. All those in favor, vote aye. All opposed, vote nay. All those that voted who want to? Mr. Clerk, please record.
35 ayes, 1 nay on the adoption of the proposed rules change.
The vote carried. Mr. Clerk, you have items for discussion?
Thank you, Mr. President. I do. I have a notice of committee hearing from the Revenue Committee, the Urban Affairs Committee, the Health and Human Services Committee, Judiciary Committee, and the Natural Resources Committee. In addition to that, I have a motion by Senator Wayne to re-refer LB 999 from the Agriculture Committee to the Judiciary Committee pursuant to Rule 6, Section 2A. that will be laid over. That's all I have at this time.
Next item, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, the next proposed rules change offered by Senator Arch is proposed change number 24.
Speaker Arch, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is proposed rule change 24, and this concerns the consent calendar. So this will increase the threshold for the removal of a consent bill to 5 members from 3. I originally proposed 7, but in the discussion within the Rules Committee, it was their request to change this to 5, and that was fine with me. It also requires the request to be filed prior to the reading of the bill to the legislature on each stage of debate, so it can't be done immediately prior to the expiration of the 15 minutes. So just to take a step back here and talk about consent bills, because the purpose of the consent calendar is to move non-controversial, no opposition, those types of bills that are truly consensus bills. And so to make this more difficult probably isn't appropriate. We need to move those bills. So there's still an opportunity to remove something from the consent calendar, but it is 5 members rather than 3, and you need to do it before the beginning of the debate on that consent bill. So, and I'm going to use this term carefully, but so that you just don't bomb the introducer and suddenly at minute 14 you're trying to pull this off the consent calendar. So if you really have a legitimate issue with that consent bill, then get the 5 signatures, say it up front before so that it can be removed from the calendar. We don't spend 15 minutes talking about it unnecessarily, and then the work can be done on that. So it does require a significant minority of senators to agree, which is 5. It increases the likelihood that a consent calendar could be utilized and not used inappropriately. And bills on consent calendar, as I said, are all non-controversial and are often needed for simple cleanup language. So I would ask you for a yes vote on this change. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just wanted to give a little shout out about what the consent calendar is to folks who may be watching on the television and also to some of our newer members, because of course we didn't have a consent calendar last year. So if you don't know, the consent calendar is a way to get, and I think the speaker touched on this, but it's a way to get those non-controversial, good government kind of bills through the process without sort of gumming up the system, taking less time. In order to get a bill on consent calendar, you apply to the speaker, and the speaker can accept or reject your request. Typically, there are some requirements. One, in the time that I've been here, you're not allowed to have a fiscal note on it, or it must be a very, very small fiscal note. And we're talking like $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 type of very small fiscal note. So a consent calendar bill would need to have no or very little fiscal impact. Then it needs to come out of committee clean, which means that there can be no dissenting votes. You can have a non-voting member, but you cannot have a no vote out of committee. There needs to not be opposition to the bill in the bill's hearing, although if there is opposition to the bill in the bill's hearing, but it gets worked out. So you speak to the opposing parties, or the example was given to me in the past that somebody came and objected because the bill didn't go far enough. So those kinds of opposition testimony won't kill the ability for the bill to get onto consent calendar. But generally speaking, the objection to the bill has to be worked out. Once all of those conditions are met, if the speaker approves you, you get on consent calendar. The difference between consent calendar and our regular process isn't really that different. You still go through 3 rounds of debate. The only difference is how long the debate may last. So instead of having the regular 8 hours of debate on a bill on general file, a consent calendar bill is allotted 15 minutes, or I'm not entirely sure actually if the speaker gets to decide how long the debate goes, but it's a much, much shorter amount of time. And the idea is that these are already pretty much consensus items that we can all pretty much agree to. A lot of cleanup things. This might be those problems where there's a comma, like Senator Kavanaugh was talking about yesterday with ENR, or something like that, which has inadvertently happened. I've had a couple of these bills. Last year, I had a bill that literally said, when we say small cell, we mean small cell in legislation. So just clarifying things, these things that are really very uncontroversial. That's a consent calendar. And it's interesting as we talk about the number of bills that people bring, because consent calendar bills don't take up that much time. They don't take that much time in hearings. They don't take that much time on the floor. And there's something that we can do to clean things up. It's meant to be a much shorter process for things that it's going to be hard to find anybody to disagree with. That's why there is the provision that if somehow the committee and the speaker and everybody gets it wrong, and there is some controversial aspect of the bill that no one thought of, then 5 senators after this rule change could write a letter and say, we'd like to have this taken off of consent calendar.
1 minute.
So it was 3 in the past. We've seen instances where at the very last moment, 3 people got together and said, please take this off of consent calendar. I think we're just trying to avoid that and make sure that, it has to be, you have to be able to have some friends that agree with you and not just, as the speaker said, bomb someone's bill for no reason. So that's how consent calendar works. If we'd had one last year, that's how it would have worked. It's a way to move a whole lot of legislation very, very quickly. Sometimes we do 10 bills in an hour because they're, again, these very small cleanup sort of bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I'm sorry I didn't give a heads up, but would Speaker Arch yield to a question?
Speaker Arch, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
I'm sorry. Apologies for not giving you a heads up.
That's all right.
Hopefully it'll be painless. So you moving this from 3 to 5, and the amount of debate, you did strike through the 15 minutes. So does that leave flexibility, or I guess, can you speak to that?
Okay. Thank you. Yes, that 15-minute applies to only pulling the bill off. So
Okay.
it reads prior to the expiration of 15 minutes of debate at that. So if it had been 30 minutes, it would have been, but prior to 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's just now I see. So now it's prior to the reading of the bill at each stage of debate. I was someone who had a bill pulled on consent calendar my freshman year, and it was only 3 people, and it was at 10 o'clock at night on final reading. I remember it very clearly. So I appreciate this, and I appreciate going down from 7, because I did feel like 7 was a kind of a high number. But I guess my question to you is, would you consider not allowing it to be pulled on final? If it's gone through the first 2 rounds, I guess my question is, then it's not really consent if you're pulling it on final, and I get that's the whole point of having this in here, but this kind of allows people to, I don't know.
So I think it goes back to the stages of debate. Why do we have 3 stages of debate?
Sure.
And I think that there could be new information that could pop up between select and final. And
Okay.
so I would say
fair.
we should preserve that. If I could also point out, it was brought to my attention, Section 6D it references the 15 minutes. So this was the 15 minutes to pull, but section 6D, a bill on consent calendar shall be allotted 15 minutes for introduction and debate.
So that brings another question to mind.
Sure.
Would you consider changing section 6D to be 25 minutes? If we're changing the number from 3 to 5, should we not allow for those who would have the opportunity to pull it? Maybe that doesn't make sense. I'm just putting it out there.
I think that that's probably a more complicated question and probably should go to the Rules Committee
Yeah.
for a broader discussion on that.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Sorry for putting you and Lori on the spot. Thank you, Lori. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Senator. The cookies being distributed now are in honor of Senator Michaela Cavanaugh and Senator McDonald's birthdays. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I was thinking about the word shall and the other word versus may, and it got me thinking about tomorrow we have the governor coming in and talking. And I want to read a section out of Article 4, Section 7, which says the message from the governor. The governor may, at the commencement of each session and at the close of his term of office, and whenever the legislature may require, give by message to the legislature information of the condition of the state, and shall recommend such measures as he shall deem expedient. Key word there is may. We don't have to let him come in and talk tomorrow. And in fact, a statute outlines that he has to do it, I think, within the first 20 days. I'll get the statute number here in a little bit so you guys can have a full, clear picture. But just so everybody knows, that is a motion for the body that we could vote down. We could actually debate it. If you'll recall, 3 years ago, I started a debate during the motion to bring then Governor Ricketts in, and it was only about 5-10 minutes, and then we let it go. But that is a debatable motion that I think we should spend a lot of time tomorrow talking about. I think we should spend a lot of time talking about whether we should allow the governor to come in and talk. And there's no other time to talk about it until that motion's made. It could be one person talking once. It could be amendments. I think we usually do an escort committee of 5. So I can take 5 people and rearrange those. I'm looking at about 111 amendments that I get 10 minutes to talk on every time. Even if Senator Erdman pushes his button and calls the question, I go to the next amendment. That's what may versus shall is. Constitution says may. But once he comes, he shall, or she comes, she shall give recommendations, such measures as he shall deem expedient. And at a time fixed by law, he shall present. So he shall do something if we present it by law, and doesn't have to be necessarily tomorrow. And doesn't necessarily have to be at 10. And I can replace each person on that committee of 4 with another person on an amendment. We could be here all day before the announcement of the State of the Union is even done. Senator McKinney has talked about the prison and the rules and I think tomorrow I'm gonna talk about the disrespect to the committee that I represent and how this community has no input in what's going on. And maybe I'll spend 4 or 5 hours on that as the governor listens in the hallway. Maybe. I don't know yet. My property taxes. I might open up a whole thing tomorrow about the epic tax and why I support it. Then me and Urban and I will have a fun time talking. I might talk about the proposed taxes that I saw introduced today.
1 minute.
And it is a good thing to see Senator DeKay in the box up there. Many years I used to sit up in that box, and that was the only time I paid attention to what was going on the floor. Most of the time, I never paid attention. It's a long way back there. The worst part about it is I can say whatever I can want, and there's nothing you can say in return. One year, Senator Hansen was up there for his first time, and I did a motion to overrule the chair. It was really funny. I pulled the motion, but Senator Hansen was a little nervous. So thank you for your time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Seeing no other names in the queue, Speaker Arch, you are recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we are now on Rule Change 24, which affects the consent calendar. The only thing I would add is something that Senator Michaela Cavanaugh brought up just to be reinforced. There are 3 stages of debate, every bill, consent calendar being no different. And so if at some point this rule change is not intended to make it more difficult, but rather just to put some guardrails on it so that it's going to be 5 people that need to sign on and it needs to be done before the debate. So I would ask for your yes vote on proposed rule change number 24. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. The question before the body is to vote on the amendments to the permanent rules, proposed rule change 24, Rule 5, Section 6. All in favor say aye. All opposed, all in favor vote aye. All opposed vote nay. Has everyone voted that wished to? Mr. Clerk, please record.
35 ayes, 2 nays on the adoption, Mr. President.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, new bills, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Legislative Bill 1383 offered by Senator Raybold. It's a bill for enacting the Indian tribes to create the Nebraska Tribal Assistance Program for the purpose of providing grants to Indian tribes to improve drinking water systems or sanitary sewer systems as prescribed, to create the Nebraska Tribal Community Assistance Fund, transfer funds from the intern Nebraska Cash Fund, harmonize provisions, and repeal the original sections. 1384 by Senator Raybold. It's a bill for enacting economic development to create the Transforming Cities and Villages Program, provide for grants as prescribed, change provisions of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, change provisions of and transfer money from the intern Nebraska Cash Fund to eliminate obsolete provisions, repeal the original sections, declare an emergency. 1385 by Senator Kauth at the request of the governor. It's a bill for an act relating to teachers to change provisions relating to the issuance of and eligibility for certificates and permits, harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1386 by Senator Ben Hansen. It's a bill for an act relating to students to require the state treasurer to establish an educational savings account for each student enrolled in kindergarten through 12th grade at an approved or accredited private denominational parochial school for use on qualified educational expenses as prescribed, to create a fund, provide powers and duties, provide a penalty for fraud or theft associated with an educational savings account. 1387 by Senator Ben Hansen. It's a bill for an act relating to public health and welfare, change provision relating to fluoridation of water provided by certain political subdivisions and other entities, to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1388 by Senator Bostar. It's a bill for an act relating to post-secondary education, to adopt the Excellence in Education Scholarship Act and the Nebraska College Promise Act, provide for transfers to the Cash Reserve Fund, repeal the original sections, declare an emergency. 1389 by Senator Bostar. It's a bill for an act relating to revenue and taxation, amend section 77202, provide a property tax exemption for broadband equipment as prescribed, and repeal the original section. 1390 by Senator Bostar. It's a bill for an act relating to elections to require reports, prohibit and change provision relating to the interference with certain election officers and workers, prohibit dissemination of the home address of certain election officers and workers, to prohibit deepfakes, provide and change penalties, to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections, and declare an emergency. 1391 by Senator Ballard. It's a bill for an act relating to schools to require that each approved or accredited public, private, denominational, or parochial high school have an automated external defibrillator on school property in close proximity to each school athletic venue. To require that coaches receive training in automated external defibrillators, to require certain high schools to establish athletic emergency action plans, provide powers and duties to the State Board of Education. 1392 by Senator Ballard. It's a bill for an act relating to child welfare, change the name and members of the Foster Care Reimbursement Rate Committee, change powers and duties to eliminate obsolete provisions, harmonize provisions, repeal the original section. 1393 by Senator Ben Hansen at the request of the governor. A bill for an act relating to the Nebraska Student Athlete Name, Image, and Likeness Rights Act, change provision relating to name, image, and likeness rights and limitations, civil actions, contracts or agreements under the act, provide severability, repeal the original sections, declare an emergency. That's all I have at this time.
Mr. Clerk, next item.
Mr. President, the next rules change is proposed rules change number 13, offered by Senator Arch.
Speaker Arch, you are recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are now on proposed rule change 13. And this has apparently been an error in our rule book for some time. It is a reference to section 3 in that first sentence rather than section 4. And let me explain here. The revisor's office does not engross interim studies, and that is what is referenced in section 3, because they are not formally adopted or passed by the legislature. So the reference 3 here is inappropriate. However, it does engross resolutions in section 2 and amended resolutions in section 4. So what this does, it removes the reference to section 3, replaces it with a reference to section 4, and the inclusion of section 3 is a technical error in our current rules. So I would encourage you to vote yes on this rule change. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to point out for my colleagues that this is exactly the kind of thing that ENR amendments fixes for us, but the rules do not go through the ENR amendment process, so therefore they do not get fixed in the same way that our bills were. But if you had a bill and it looked like this rule did before we have the proposed rule change, then what would happen is ENR would say, oh, they've referenced the wrong section. And in fact, that happens somewhat frequently. And then what they do is they just do exactly what we're doing in this proposed rule change to fix it for us. So these are the kinds of, now, could they get it wrong? Could they have put 5 instead of 4 and then we get to the wrong place? Absolutely, they could have. And that is why Senator John Kavanaugh was insistent that there has to be some way to fix it. But that would be something that we would have to deal with in the actual debate on the bill. But I just wanted to point out to my colleagues that because this does not go through ENR, we did not have the benefit of their expertise, and therefore we end up with a rule on the books that's kind of got some errors in it. And so I just wanted to say one more time, thanks to the bill drafters who are up there, and they've really put in a lot of hard work in the last couple of weeks. There are people that you see, if you're watching from home, there are people you see on the camera, and maybe there are some people that you see occasionally, like you might see the pages walk by, or you might see the clerks. or someone in the clerk's office walk by. And then there are people that you don't get to see, and those people really keep this place running and really help us to make the laws for Nebraska and to make Nebraska a well-governed state. And so, you know, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh pointed out that we have Lori over there who is helping Speaker Arch through all of these proposed rules changes. We all have our own personal staff. Anyway, there are a lot of folks who help us because left to our own devices, I suspect there would be a lot more of these kinds of changes that were necessary. So I just wanted to shout out to all of the folks who are behind the scenes, making all of this place work and making sure that we don't make as many of these kinds of mistakes. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Clerk, do you have an amendment?
Mr. President, I had an amendment from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, but I have a note that she wishes to withdraw.
It is withdrawn. Returning to the queue, Senator John Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is good to see you up there. So I rise in support of this amendment, and I just wanted to sort of say something similar to what Senator DeBoer was saying. But I appreciate the diligence and the work that Speaker Arch put into this rules process. And while I said I disagree with generally changing the rules this time, he did not only look at changes that were kind of addressing how some of the floor debate went last year, but also, looked at holistically at the rules and said, oh, wait, here's a mistake that's in there. But another interesting point about this is this mistake that's in here is clearly as a result of some change in the past. It's probably an insertion into that section 4 of the rules that pushed the enrollment and review amendment resolutions down, and somebody put that in there and didn't think about how that affected other sections of the rules. And this kind of goes along with what I've been saying a lot of the time is, let's all be thoughtful about this. Let's look and to use the benefit of 49 sets of eyes, looking at everything critically and thinking through, say, wait, this actually, I know this rule interacts with another section or it references another section. And, Senator Wayne's got eagle eyes and he picked up on a change in one of the earlier amendments that kind of got missed. And it's through that kind of process where everybody engages and actually looks at it and thinks through these things before that saves us from a mistake like the one that was made at some point in the past that we don't know. And the result of that was not that we were not doing what we were supposed to, but we were doing what the intention of the rules were, but not the letter of the rules. So we were not following our own rules, but we were still engrossing the things that we needed to engross. So this is a good amendment, but it does also, the necessity for this amendment is the fact that at some point in the past, a previous legislature moved in too much haste in making a change and didn't pay attention to what the consequences were. So I would encourage everybody, again, to continue to look at all of these critically, make the small changes we need to make. The other thing I wanted to point out was, I think on the consent calendar amendment, we did get through it in 15 minutes. So again, I appreciate Speaker Arch's diligence on these rules and continue to work with everybody. He's been working very collaboratively these last couple of days to try and get us all in a place where we are somewhat comfortable with how things are working. So I appreciate that, and I would encourage a green vote on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I'm just taking up a little bit of time here because a fellow senator wanted to ask me a whole bunch of questions about me. So I'm just going to tell you who I am very short, and so I don't have to repeat this over and over. It's really simple, and I hope people are listening. My name is Justin Thomas Wayne. I have 3 first names. But more importantly, I was born here in Omaha, Nebraska. My birth mother was ran out of Kansas, small town in Kansas, because she was in a relationship with a black person. Rather than abort me, my birth mother decided to come up here and live homeless in Omaha at the Salvation Army on 24th and Pratt. She gave birth to me and gave me up for adoption. I have a mother who is Caucasian and a father who is black. They are the 2 individuals who raised me. My mother's family is from a small town called Rolfe, Iowa. They were farmers. So the reason why I know a little bit about farming is because I used to walk the beans, detassel, and pick up rocks. And I don't mean riding machines in detassel. I mean walk walk and actually detassel and pick up the bean or and walk the beans. My father was from Omaha, Nebraska, so it was a true urban. Saw the riots of the 70s, watched gentrification, watched a lot of things that happened in North Omaha, including a highway go in to destroy his community. Both of them worked 2, if not 3 jobs to watch me and my brother go to school and provide for me. During my time as an elected official, if you want to know who I am, I don't pull punches. I tell you exactly where I'm at and I keep it moving. I have fought the most white liberals when I was on the school board and the most conservative racists. If you know who I am in this body, I tell you how I feel. And I'm not stuck on one side or the other. I'm stuck on what's best for my community. I represent the most diverse district in Omaha. I have 2 homeless shelters, and I have the legacy of Walter Scott and his son and other millionaires and billionaires in Ponca. I go as far as the county line and right down to where it's considered North Omaha. And when something good happens, it's considered Florence. When something bad happens, it's North Omaha. That is my district. My district consists of one of the most best 2 country clubs called Omaha Country Club, where all the deals that were made in Omaha happened at that or Happy Hollow during my lifetime growing up. And there was a part of my lifetime I couldn't even swim in that pool. At that swim meet, they would come down to Mountain View swimming pool because they didn't want us in their pool. I've seen it all. There's a lot that I still have to see. So when you ask me where I'm at and you ask me why I'm fighting for my community and why tomorrow the governor may not speak till 4 o'clock, it's because I've been fighting this fight for too long for individuals to decide they're going to upset the apple cart my last year. So if you want to know who I am, that is my background. There isn't a story in here that a person can't tell me that I can't relate to. I know about PTSD. I know about my best friend, Derek Cleghorn, one of my good friends, getting killed my 9th grade year because he actually beat up somebody and they came back and shot him in the face. I remember at Northwest High School what that did to everybody there. I know what it's like wondering why a parent may have gave you up. I know what it's like to meet a parent and have those emotions. So there isn't an issue before this body that I can say I personally haven't dealt with. So when you ask me who I am, or when you wonder why tomorrow I might step off the ledge, because it's been over 44 years in the making, where we have an opportunity to change the dynamics of a community that I've watched be abused by both sides. And now I'm watching it be abused again by this administration. So don't be surprised, don't be mad. It really doesn't matter to me, because at the end of the day, I'm gonna go home to my family. I'm gonna go back out here in these streets and say I did all that I could, even if that means not letting the governor talk tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. See no other names in the queue. Speaker Arch, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this is Rule Change 13. It strikes the number 3 because that is inaccurate and puts in the number 4 because that is accurate. And so I would ask for your vote on the Rule Change 13. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The question before the body is the amendment to the permanent rules, proposed rule change 13, Rule 4, Section 7. All in favor, vote A. All opposed, vote nay. All vote who choose to. Record, Mr. Clerk.
33 yeas, 3 nays, Mr. President, on the adoption of the rules change.
The amendment carried. Mr. Clerk, more bills?
Legislative Bill 1394, offered by Senator Brewer at the request of the governor. It's a bill for enacting revenue and taxation to exempt Nebraska National Guard income from state income taxation as prescribed and repeal the original sections. 1395 by Senator Merman. It's a bill for enacting relating to natural asset companies to adopt the Natural Asset Company Prohibition Act. 1396 by Senator Merman. It's a bill for enacting relating to the Nebraska Pure Food Act. Amend Section 812283, change provision relating to labeling for misbranded food and repeal the original sections. 1397 by Senator Merman. It's a bill for an act relating to property taxes, and then Section 771359 to redefine agricultural land and horticultural land to exclude land use for certain purposes and repeal the original section. 1398 by Senator Merman. It's a bill for an act relating to schools to change provisions relating to reimbursement for special education programs and support services relating to student option students and repeal the original sections. 1399 by Senator Merman. It's a bill for an act relating to schools, change provision relating to the involvement of parents, guardians, and educational decision makers in the education of children to define terms, harmonize provisions, and repeal the original section. LB 1400 by Senator Ballard at the request of the governor. It's a bill for an act relating to revenue and taxation to adopt the Relocation Incentive Act to harmonize provisions and repeal the original sections. That's all I have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Next agenda item is amendment to the permanent rules, proposed rule change 15, Rule 5, Section 7. Speaker Arch, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is proposed rule change 15. It amends Rule 5, Section 7, the fiscal analyst. So what this rule change does is it changes the physical distribution. We reference in the present rule words such as attached, where we, of course, at one time physically attached the fiscal note to the bill. And we, of course, aren't doing that anymore. And if we have a rule that requires us to do certain things and we're not doing that, it's probably time to change the rule. So it matches our current practice, and it changes it from this physical distribution of attached of fiscal notes to digital distribution. So the good news is with digital distribution, you don't have to wait for the printed distribution to occur, and it ensures the availability of the fiscal note as quickly as it is completed. And so that is the change to Rule 15, or the Rule Change 15, and I would ask for a yes vote on this change. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to continue with my discussion for the people who are watching at home and for our new members about the fiscal note. Obviously, this is where we find out what the impact on the general fund and also on cash funds will be because of the bills that we propose. It's quite frequent that you are surprised by a fiscal note, because what happens is they send away, I'll give you pronouns. When you introduce a bill, the fiscal analysts will ask for input from the affected agencies and from the various other parts of the government that might be affected. It might be the judicial branch. The court administrator would then report in the fiscal note how the cash funds and general funds and their funds will be affected. And you get this big, long report that says how all of the things will be affected, and you quickly turn to the very page where there's a number, and you just see what the fiscal impact will be of your bill. And I say that it's sometimes surprising because sometimes you don't know that some small thing you're going to do is going to require somebody to hire 20 more employees or something like that. And so you get a huge fiscal note when you're doing what you think is a small thing. So from that point on, when you're given that fiscal note, then you try and amend it. But a piece that I think members in this body aren't necessarily aware of that are newer is that when you have an amendment, until it is adopted, you're not going to get a revised fiscal note. So you have to, if the fiscal office was trying to react to all of our proposed amendments, it would take a really long time for them to be able to get to all of those. So unless you get your amendment adopted on the floor, then they're not going to do the fiscal note as far as that. So this is wonderful that we're going to do them electronically now. Obviously, you can still access them online as they have always been, but instead of requiring a paper copy, I think this is a great update, just needed to be done, one of those things. But I thought I'd take the chance to kind of talk about what a fiscal note is and make sure that those who are following along at home had an understanding. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Seeing no other names in the queue, Speaker Arch, you are recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. So again, rule change 15, it takes it from the physical distribution of the fiscal notes to digital distribution. I would appreciate a yes vote on this rule change. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. The question before it is amendment to the permanent rules, proposed rule change 15, Rule 5, Section 7. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have all voted who wish to? Mr. Clerk, record.
36 ayes, 3 nays on the adoption of the proposed amendment to the permanent rules.
The amendment carried.
Mr. President, next item on the agenda, proposed rule change 16 from Senator Arch concerning Rule 8, Section 5.
Speaker Arch, you are recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are now on to rule change 16. This will amend Rule 8, Section 5. And this was actually brought on behalf of the Legislative Fiscal Office. So this ensures that bills relating to the transfer of cash reserve funds are held for final reading to inform the legislature of the full fiscal impact similar to all A bills with a negative general fund impact. It doesn't change the referencing of any cash reserve fund transfer bills, but does treat them like an A bill. And the transfer of any cash reserve funds do have an impact on the budget, so should be held until the budget bills are passed. I'm hoping that Senator Clemens can bring some clarity to this, but I'm going to try and explain a little bit more here. There is a main cash reserve fund bill, and that is not what we're talking about here. That is part of the budget. This is not what that is, but we often can use the cash reserve funds to fund something, and those bills can go to different committees. So rather than having a general fund A bill, it will have a funding mechanism intending to use the cash reserve funds. We may have some transfers in and out of the cash reserve fund itself, and that would have an impact. And so we would under this rule, we would hold those until the end, and after the budget is understood and we understand where we are fiscally, like appropriation bills or the A bills, we would then move these bills at the very end. So with that, I'll stop, and I would ask for a yes vote on this. It was, as I mentioned, it was brought by the Legislative Fiscal Office. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Senator Clements, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of this rule change. As he said, the Legislative Fiscal Office was who brought this forward. And most cash reserve fund budgeting does go in the Appropriations Committee, but there could be situation where there's some kind of a new program that the Committee of Jurisdiction have heard about creating something new and spending maybe one-time money to build a building somewhere. And also there could be somebody transferring money out of the cash reserve for a program that they're wanting to fund on a one-time basis. And we have minimum standards for the amount of money in the cash reserve. We like to keep 16% of our budget in the cash reserve. It's about a 2-month reserve expense fund, emergency fund, I guess you'd call it, that we'd like to have, make sure that we have at least 2 months of expenses on hand. And if something got passed that would reduce that, we would then have to be scrambling with what are we going to do about that. And this just makes sure that we coordinate all the bills that would have cash reserve transfers, especially reductions, so that we can put those together at the end of the budget process and make sure that we keep an adequate reserve as our goal is. So I would support this. Let's see, rule change 16. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, proposed amendment from Senator DeBoer to be distributed to members shortly.
Speaker Arch. Senator DeBoer, you are recognized to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, colleagues, interestingly enough, this does very little to change the proposal that we're talking about here. But when I was looking at this proposal, I discovered that this particular rule is written absolutely terribly. For example, let me read you one of the, and I'll say this in scare quotes, sentences. Provided the Appropriations Committee shall place appropriations bill on general file no later than the 70th legislative day in a 90-day session and the 40th legislative day in a 60-day sentence. You may have noticed that's not a sentence. So we have a sentence fragment there. We don't know whether that goes with the sentence before or after. Additionally, there's a whole lot, 6 semicolons in here that don't belong. As folks were saying, as long as we're under the hood, we ought to fix this. So here is an opportunity again where we didn't have ENR reviewing, and so we have a poorly written bill. So what I have done, and obviously the pages have not handed this out yet, I'm sorry about that, but you'll get this if you're following along. All of the semicolons trying to create a list here are going to become commas. And yes, Senator Kavanaugh, I will include the Oxford comma, even though I'm not a fan. It is her birthday, so there you go. And then in the list at the bottom where it says appropriate general funds resulting in a net loss, all bills resulting in the reduction of revenue due to the general fund, comma, then all tax expenditure bills, comma, all bills containing a transfer to or from the cash reserve, comma, and all appropriations bills shall not, and it goes on. So in those 2 instances, the semicolons become commas, which they should be, and we fix the sentence fragment by simply taking away the provided the. So we say the Appropriations Committee shall place appropriations bills on general file no later than the 70th legislative day in a 90-day session and the 40th legislative day in a 60-day session, period. That's a sentence. Wonderful. So we just take out the provided. It's clear what that means is that there is the contingency because it says if this deadline is not met in the next sentence. So we know then that we don't need the provided that because there is a consequence if this deadline is not met. I know that this is sort of a smaller change, but this is a part of my larger attempt to try to make our rules a little more readable, a little more accessible, a little more understandable to people when they first come into the legislature. I did say at the beginning of this, fewer words are better. I'm only getting rid of one word, but it's fewer words. So we're trying to just make our rules more accessible to new members, since every couple of years every 2 years, we get a lot of new members now that we have term limits. So I think they're passing them out to you now, and you can look at that and see what you want to see. I will echo what Senator Erdman has said in the past, which is that we probably ought to go through all of our rules. I know that the index clerk has indicated that she would be willing to index them for us, which would help. The time when this helps isn't now, when we're all sitting here happily listening to grammatical discussion. The time when we want to have all of this the way we want to have it is when something crazy happens on the floor and everybody gets out whatever color the book, I don't know what it'll be this year, but whatever bright color they make the rules book, and you can look around and you can see 12 copies of that bright colored rule book come out, and everybody's trying to figure out where's the appropriate rule. And if we have these kinds of ridiculous grammatical issues, it's really hard for us to get to the bottom of the thing. And so we just want to make clarity. I will say I would be interested in working on a larger kind of fix-it situation with our rules to try to make them more clear, make sure that everybody understands them, and we get fewer words in our rule book, not more. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Dungan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just looking at this for the first time. I unfortunately missed some of the conversation prior to this, but I did come up while Senator DeBoer was talking. In reading over the way this is being modified, though, by getting rid of the semicolons, I have, I guess, some concerns with the grammatical way this could be read. Would Senator DeBoer yield to a question?
Senator DeBoer, will you yield to a question?
I suppose so.
And I apologize for putting you on the spot. I'm looking at this and I was talking with the speaker, and I want to make sure that we're getting this correct. So when it says the beginning part here, I'm looking at the semicolons.
The first list?
Yeah, so my concern is if we get rid of all of the semicolons and replace them, however, with commas, I'm worried that's going to confuse some of the phrases there that sort of clarify other parts. For example, during a 90-day session, all A bills which, comma, when considered with their companion bill, comma, appropriate general funds resulting in a net loss. And then that semicolon there, I think, is meant to end that phrase.
Well,
and then it moves on to all bills resulting in the reduction of revenue to the general fund and all tax expenditure bills. And so if we replace all the semicolons with comma, does that conflate then the when considered with their companion bill portion? Or I'm just worried if you start adding a bunch of commas, if you're going to get like a run-on phrase where it's unclear what's modifying which part of it. Does that make sense? And if not, could you please clarify why it would make sense with those commas there?
So the commas are used to indicate the parallel structure of a list, which is what we would do if we had a comma. The commas that are, when considered with the companion bill, indicate an appositive. So we have the appositive, which modifies the A bills, and then we have the parallel structure of the list following that. The semicolons would not indicate the parallel structure of the list, and commas would indicate the parallel structure of the list.
Okay, so does the when considered with their companion bill then affect all of the remaining parts of that list?
That's an appositive for A bills. So that's for the when considered with their companion bill. So that's the main bill that goes with the A bill. So if you have LB 225 and then LB 225A, so that would be the A bill with the companion bill, the original bill.
Okay. I just know there were some concerns if you move all of those to commas that it's going to actually create more confusion than it's going to clarify. I will always defer to you on grammar. I believe that you know exactly what you're talking about. I just want to make sure that when other people read this and kind of go through that list, it's clear which parts modify other parts. And so I think that was some of the concern, but we can continue to have a discussion about this. I know some others had brought that up, but I appreciate your clarification, especially on the record, because if that comes up later, I think it's good to have that clear on the record. So thank you, Senator DeBoer, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Arch, Speaker Arch, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator DeBoer and I spoke about this before. She pointed out that the sentences are cumbersome. I don't disagree. I'm no English major with semicolons, but I do notice that the attempt with the semicolons was to divide where it begins all bills resulting in the reduction, all bills containing a transfer, all tax expenditures, all bills resulting in the reduction, all tax expenditure bills, all bills containing a transfer, all appropriations bills. And I think the attempt was that those semicolons would make those stand out so that as an individual was reading this rule, they would understand that these were speaking of different groupings of bills. And so it is cumbersome the way it is right now. I don't want to change it so that it makes it equally cumbersome, but that the goal is ease of reading, so that we all understand exactly what these rules are referring to. So I'm considering, Senator DeBoer, as it relates to your punctuation changes, and we'll have some more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Senator Clements, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just now getting this also in a quick review with the Director of the Fiscal Office. I agree with her that the current semicolons separate the topics better, and the sentence that that's being stricken, or parts of it, it already has 2 commas before you get 3 commas before you get to the first semicolon. And that's one thought. But then the semicolons, I like them because they do create more of a list. You stop here and you start a new item on the list. And so you have bills with a net loss is one thing, semicolon, then bills resulting in reduction of revenue. That's another type of bill. Tax expenditure bills is another type of bill. It's separated by a semicolon. And so I do not support this amendment. I prefer to leave the wording in the proposed rule change as proposed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Senator Arch and I have come to an agreement that the best way to work this out is to do neither the comma nor the semicolon solution, but instead to create a list. I think what happened is that initially there was just 1, maybe 2 of these things listed. Now that there are 4, it makes a lot more sense to bullet them out as lists. Senator Moser also pointed out that there is a typo in one place on my amendment that the word day and in have been put together without a space. We will fix that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a list in both of these circumstances. So these are the types of things that will be held. And I think that will make it clearer for everyone. Senator Arch, would you yield to a question?
Senator Arch, would you yield to a question? Speaker Arch.
Yes, I will.
Speaker Arch, have I correctly characterized our agreement that we would bullet this as a list?
Yes, this has been very complicated, but yes, we are going to do that. As a matter of fact, I believe the clerk is going to help us with that and get this to a correct amendment. When you say bullet, I think we'll do the 1, 2, and we'll actually number these. And will make it much easier to read. So yes,
I accept. We can do 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of bullets.
and we'll have that back quickly.
Okay, so in the meantime,
We have others.
we will see when that comes up. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Moser, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greetings, colleagues and Nebraskans watching us argue over commas and semicolons. I saw that typo in Senator DeBoer's amendment, and I was thinking that it needed a comma between day and in and a space. So actually they're working on a reformat of this rule so that it's actually shown as a list or kind of like bullet points, so that the format of the rule helps explain what we're trying to do. So that's what is happening right now. They're working on some things to make this all simpler and easier to read. Neither one of the amendments was particularly clear to the average reader, and so I think they're trying to fix that. So I was talking to Senator Wayne earlier. He was talking about his concern about the governor coming to talk to us, and so I was wondering if Senator Wayne would respond to a couple of questions.
Senator Wayne, would you yield to a question?
Sure.
Greetings.
Greetings, sir. How are you doing?
I'm just peachy, good as an old guy can be at my age, and all the crazy things that I've tried to do in my life and I got myself.
But you're still a good musician.
Yeah, well, we're having a rehearsal tonight, so we'll see.
What are you playing?
We're playing for a dance club this weekend, actually.
Oh.
And and we haven't played for about 3 months, so it'll be sketchy, but we'll get through it. Sometimes your most unprepared moments are the most fun.
I agree.
When the dance is well scripted, it's not as much fun as if you feel the moment and you play it.
So you don't know what music you're going to play at the sketchy dance?
You know, I don't know what we're going to actually play for sure. I picked my favorite 19 songs out of 600, and I'm just waiting for my friends to respond with their list, and then we'll...
Give me one song.
One song?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
You have 19. You can't think of one?
I can, but you're not old enough to know what any of these songs are, probably.
I am well seasoned. Give me a try.
Do you know who the Casinos were?
I have a couple across the river.
Yeah. The Casinos had a song, Then You Can Tell Me Goodbye. It's a really cool kind of a doo-wop love song about go through life, get along, do everything together, you know, and then if it don't work out, then you can tell me goodbye. In other words, you know, when one of you goes or you both go, that's the end. But up until that point, we're gonna, you know, get along well.
So
anyway,
you stay with them until it doesn't work out, then you say goodbye.
Yeah, no.
That seems kind of logical.
Stay with it until you croak or something.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, you need to go on YouTube and Google that, and you'd enjoy the song. It's a cool old song. I don't know who wrote it. Somebody made a lot of money with it, I'll tell you that. Anyway, though, I want to get back to the discussion of aid to North Omaha and Florence, or however you're describing it. And I was wanting to ask you what your concerns are.
Oh, I don't have a lot of, I mean, some of the concerns have already been out in the press. I don't have a whole lot of concerns. I just have some very pointed, deep concerns. So I don't have a lot. I just have some pointed, deep concerns. One is we are granting an organization roughly over $86 million, and their whole purpose is to create pads to be shovel ready and not produce one job. I don't think that's what this body who voted on a bill 47-1 thought when we were putting money aside within 2 miles of the airport that we would spend $90 million to create some flat land that has some nice drainage underneath it. So that's a major concern. Another major concern is we tend to be looking at some of these grants from what we're hearing going to a lot of nonprofits. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's been a very interesting conversation, been both the grammatical conversation and the musical conversation. Interesting. I think we're almost ready with the amendment, but I did push my light for a specific reason. So we were having a disagreement about what is the proper usage of semicolons versus commas. And I thought, why? I guess that's the end of that sentence. I thought, why? And not a comma, period. I thought, why, period. And then I thought, well, maybe we had a difference of opinion about which is the correct format or style guide to use. Maybe Senator Clements is a MLA guy and Senator DeBoer is the Chicago style. And then I looked it up, and actually there's the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, usually used in education, psychological, and science. So there's at least 3 style guides that are out there that might have different recommendations and usage. And so I thought to myself, maybe we could avoid this problem in the future if we created a rule and said the legislature will operate under the Chicago style guide or the MLA. I'm not trying to start a fight right now, so I'm not suggesting that we pick one. But as we have this conversation in the future, something to think about next session, we could avoid these sorts of confusion and ugliness of the fight about semicolons if we just choose a consistent style guide to adhere to. So that's my suggestion for next year. Maybe I'll bring that as a rule proposal if I'm back here next year. And I don't know, are we ready? Maybe not. Maybe I'll talk a little more about the Chicago guide and the MLA guide. When those of us who went to law school, there's a few of us in here, we also have what we call the Blue Book, which when I was in law school went from, about 300 pages to about 600 pages, got a lot bigger. And so there were a lot more because they started contemplating how to cite to the internet. We're ready. All right. So I think we're ready to get the answer, the long-awaited answer to whether it's semicolon, comma, or list is the easier thing to read. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Clements, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator DeBoer yield to a question?
Senator DeBoer, will you yield to a question?
Reluctantly.
Well, I'm not seeing another copy being passed around yet. Has there been one prepared?
Yes, Senator Clements, there has, and I think it's just taking him a little while to make the photocopies and pass them out.
All right, well then, thank you for that. I want to just discuss this rule section in general. So some of the new senators are more aware of it. And, thank you. This is in Rule 8, Section 5 about bills being held on final reading. You could have a bill that passes great in the first round. It's called general file. Second round we call select file. It could be voted there, and that sends it to final reading, but it can't have a vote to finally pass it if it's doing these things about spending money. And the rule starts off by saying the Appropriations Committee shall include a recommended dollar amount of the general fund appropriation, which shall be allocated for the funding of A bills that reduce the revenue to the general fund. And so I've already been asked, is there going to be money for A bills? And those A bills are appropriation bills. And right now, the state's revenues have been stable, but they're about right on what we've budgeted for. And if the revenues match what the budget is, we've already allocated the budgeted amount, which is what the forecasting board does. They set a projection of revenues and we budget to that. And one of the important things is that, especially during a 90-day session when we're setting the budget, this section says that when bills appropriate general funds resulting in a net loss, they're going to be held up. A net loss would mean we are spending more money than we have available. And the state of Nebraska has a constitutional limit from borrowing money. So we only spend money that we have available. And so that's why it says you can't create a net loss with a bill, and it's held up until possibly some other revenues are found or a different way to fund a bill. And if it would reduce the revenues, which would be a tax cut, that would, a projection that would lower the revenues below what our budgeted amount is, that would be another situation. Another one called a tax expenditure bill. The tax expenditure bill is like an incentive. The Imagine Act that we have is called a tax expenditure because we allow people to avoid, get an exemption from tax. And so all those types of bills are held on final reading until the appropriation bills are passed by the legislature so that we set the budget bill. And then once the appropriation bills are passed and the budget is set, then the fiscal office gives us a dollar amount of how much is still available for spending, which is when the A bills would
1 minute.
arise. And then we start debating which additional spending bills that we're going to approve and prioritize them. And that's what we've already done in appropriations. We always have a lot more requests than we have money. And so we do prioritize and try to do what's best for the state of Nebraska as a whole and for taxpayers, and honor those dollars that they send in and not spend them unwisely. So I just do think this is an important rule that we have, that we make sure we're managing the budget and protecting it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. How much time do I have left?
4 minutes and 48 seconds.
Oh, so it counted for me walking. Okay, I wasn't sure. New chair, new rules. Hey, oh, sorry. Will Senator DeBoer yield to a question?
Senator DeBoer, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
So I see in this new rule, you guys came up with some bullet points. Did this have a hearing?
The underlying change, which suggested that bills containing the transfer to or from a cash reserve fund, had a hearing.
So you would say that this isn't substantially different?
I would say that the grammatical changes which we have made today are important for ease of reading, but have not made a substantial difference for the purpose of having a hearing or not.
Okay, so this is where I'm confused. I've never seen it outlined like this. So you have a 1, 2, 3 with no comma or semicolon, and then an and at the end. Shouldn't that be a or? Because if it's an and, then you're going to say during shall not be on final reading until all of these conditions are met. If it's a comma or a semicolon or, then it's each individual one. But if it's the word and, you're saying it has to be all of them met at the same time before. So if I have an A bill, but I don't have, it doesn't reduce revenue and it doesn't contain a cash transfer, and it isn't a tax expenditure, then it wouldn't qualify. I'm not saying that's possible. I'm just saying if you have the word and, it literally means all three plus the fourth. That's just
So,
grammar.
did you ask me a question?
Yeah, so should it be or?
So I'll meet you halfway here, okay? I think it is appropriate to have commas there. We do not, but I didn't want to do another show with you and Moser while we were waiting to get the new copies, so we were just going to try and add those in later, but we can add them in now.
But is it still and?
But I think it should be, and if you read it, it says during a 90-day session, the following shall not be read: A bills, bills resulting, bills containing, and all tax expenditure bills.
See, that means and, so that means all of them.
Right, all of those shall not be read on final reading until.
So aren't each of those individually one thing? So you don't want to, you don't want to, you don't want to, you don't want to, and you don't want to.
The whole list shall not be done until.
But can a bill by itself, or does it have to have a tax expenditure too?
I mean, I think I see what you're saying. If you want to make it an or.
I don't want to do anything. I'm voting against the bill in the motion. I'm just saying if you're going to do it, I think and is the wrong word. I think it has to be a.
That was in there originally, but while we're cleaning things up, if you want to somehow change that, I will take a floor amendment to my amendment to change that.
Okay, well, I believe and is the right word. I just don't like the word and at the, to me, it should be on
Wait.
3, comma, and.
You just said and is the right word. Did you mean or is the right word?
No, Clemens has it all drafted out over here next to me, so I'm going with his drafting. He has a whole diagram with arrows. It's really, really complicated, so I'm gonna yield the rest of my time.
I yield to Senator Clements.
Not really, but okay.
I yield to Mr. Clerk.
regarding that process that maybe are addressed in this rule, and I just want to kind of get a little bit of clarification. If Speaker Arch would yield to a question, I would appreciate that.
Does Speaker Arch yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So one of the questions I had with regards to when it returns back to select file, and I don't remember how this operated last year, but what is the process for debate at that point in time? Is the debate part of the same process of what's happening on final reading? Is it the same timing period, or does it start the clock on a new select file 4 hours of debate, or however that operates?
So you are debating the motion to return to select file for the purpose of adopting X. So it is a debatable motion at that time. It's not amendable, but it is debatable. Does the clock start?
And then all of the time, I believe, is running consistently on final reading. So if we have 2 hours for final reading, once you debate this motion, and if that motion is adopted and then it goes back, do you immediately then continue that clock on the 2 hours on final? Is it all part of the same time you're running?
Correct. You're on final reading, and so whatever that cloture is, it is this debate of the motion is part of that final reading time.
Okay, thank you. That's actually incredibly clarifying, because I know that was a question that I had last year, and last year was wonky. And so I appreciate some clarity on that. And I think that this is very helpful to have that clarity both on the record for future conversations, that it's all part of that final reading clock. It doesn't restart some select file clock. And I also appreciate the clarity that both a motion to return a bill to select file for that specific amendment and that amendment, once it's been returned, are neither divisible nor amendable. This is very akin to me to the same conversation we were having with regards to a motion to suspend the rules, where a motion to suspend the rules is for a specific purpose in a limited scope. I know they're not quite necessarily the same, but it's somewhat analogous in my brain to help understand it, that a motion to suspend the rules in order to do X is that thing that you're debating. And so that's very similar to how we're doing this return to select file, where the motion would be to return to select file in order to amend subparagraph 2 in such a way. And so I think that actually helped clarify a lot of things in my brain from some confusion that I had last session. Hopefully it's been helpful on the record for future conversations with regards to that clock as it runs on final reading or select file. And I would encourage my colleagues to generally be in support of proposed rule change 20. I also want to say thank you to the speaker. I think this is the last of his rules that he'd ultimately worked through. I know we've talked about this over the last couple of days or few days, but I think the speaker and his staff, along with the clerk, thank you, Mr. President, have been very open to conversations and substantive suggestions. I know we've had a lot of amendments that have been proposed. Some have been adopted, some haven't. But all of those that have been adopted have come through the collaboration of the clerk's office, the speaker's office, and our rules committee. And so I very much appreciate everyone's willingness to work through those rules. I do think that at the heart of them is a desire to maintain the institution of our unicameral while still supporting the minority voice, but also ensuring there's guardrails in place. So I do stand in support of proposed rule change 20. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. I wanted to rise in support of the proposed rule change that Speaker Arch has put forward, and that is before the body today after being advanced by the Rules Committee. I believe that this is a thoughtful amendment to our permanent rules that definitely provides much needed clarity in perhaps a rarely utilized component of our rules that always sparks a bit of confusion when it does come up. And I think my friend Senator Dungan's analogy to a motion to suspend was apt in terms of how it works in terms of practice. And I'm glad that he made that kind of explanation clear, and I'm glad that we've addressed that in our rules debate this year as well, because I think it is always kind of a confusing moment for the body to think through how these motions work. One point that I did just want to provide, perhaps on the other side of the coin from the opening remarks that Speaker Arch made, and I think he's right that in general, final reading is a time for final or quiet reflection, and it's rarely a stage in our deliberative process where we have robust debate. However, I do just want to remind the body that it is more than just a formality, and it should be. And it has been utilized upon final reading to actually have full and robust debate, particularly on highly complex and controversial matters. So that's why you may hear sometimes the filibuster rule being invoked as kind of an 8-4-2 in reference to 8 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours as a general rule of thumb regarding fair and full debate at each state of our 3 stages of debate. So while generally final reading today has become more of a reflection time or a formality, it is still an important stage of the debate and can be utilized for robust debate to allow the body one last time to pause, to consider, to reconsider whether or not to move those highly contentious measures forward. You might remember there was also some discussion last year at maybe one of the most challenging days that we had in the legislature, and it was very hard to hear each other because of the citizen engagement that was happening. But there's also an important component of our rules that does allow for a different vote threshold to still pass and advance a bill on final reading. But if said bill or said measure does in fact have an E clause on it, a lower vote total that would be requisite to pass a measure with the E clause could change things just to allow the measure to go forward, but change the timing for implementation. So that's another key piece that happens on final reading that is rarely utilized and frequently overlooked that I wanted to kind of reaffirm or redraw the body's attention to, because it did pop up in our debate on 574-626 last year. And I think that particularly new senators need to think through how that works as well. The other thing that I was going to mention in terms of how this particular rule is utilized, and I know other colleagues had already mentioned that perhaps thank you, Mr. President, that perhaps we bring a rule back from final reading to select because there was some sort of technical issue that needed to be addressed. That's absolutely a reason or an impetus that this rule is utilized from time to time. But it's also utilized for many more instances and reasons and strategies, including ongoing negotiations, sometimes fiscal impacts, sometimes time constraints, and otherwise just kind of broader negotiations, particularly as you reach the tail end of session with remaining time and remaining vehicles to move forward. So this is not utilized that often. It is utilized for a host of different reasons when it is, and I think it's important to have clarity on it for all members of the body. And final reading can and should be a deliberative stage in our process, which is already more efficient and effective than any of our sister states. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I passed out a little map. This is, if I decide to go through with my amendments tomorrow, we'll figure out, if I will, tonight when I sleep on it. But here goes one example of something that I saw that happened this year. So those who recall 2 years ago, a year ago, Senator McKinney and Senator Geis worked on a bill called LB 450 to create iHubs. Then we put $30 million behind that iHub. After last spring session, a few of us went out to the White House, and we had some conversations with the White House and other people about the proposed federal tech hubs. Now, this is not my thing. This was somebody else's thing, but I was there because I had some contacts there that could be beneficial. And so we went out there and talked to them all, and what people were kind of astonished was how Senator McKinney wrote this bill. I actually said, I don't know if it was Jesus or Moses or a burning bush, but the way he wrote this bill perfectly aligns with the federal government. And we actually did it before them. And we actually had dollars stacked behind it. So from all perspectives, we were probably one of the few states that was leading in the opportunity to be a federal tech hub. But despite conversations, you know who was never invited into the room? Senator McKinney. He was never invited to the room with the individuals who were making an application. And it wasn't until the day of the application we started catching wind that, hey, who in North Omaha can help because we have extra points given if we do it in a distressed area, which we knew 7 months ago when Senator McKinney passed this bill and then the federal regs came out. On top of that, the Sweet Chamber of Commerce of Omaha and others started recruiting companies that we were looking into the airport park and pushing them out to Fremont. They were pushing them away from North Omaha out into Fremont, which is fine. Fremont needs the jobs. But I don't think it should be a competition or either or. I think if it's good for North Omaha and it's good for Fremont and Fremont has an inland port and it works out, then that's great. But we shouldn't push people and then try to go around and say, oh, we need North Omaha, we need the poverty, we need some minorities. Let's throw in a paragraph for them in an application. But what you see in this map is we're one of 4 states. And what I can tell you is 2 of the states didn't even apply. It is embarrassing this map was put out and Senator McKinney led the way in this legislature of creating an iHub that perfectly met the federal definition in which we could get hundreds of millions for. And I get it. Maybe they don't like me, but this is just one example that I can think of real quick that I can hand out today to let you know where I'm going potentially tomorrow and the rest of the session. Missed opportunities because we don't allow certain people in the room. And you know, I talked about Omaha Country Club and how deals were being done in Omaha, everything from Conagra campus back in the 70s, I can go back farther. Certain people weren't allowed in the room. And that's what happened this summer, and it damn near mimicked what happened at Omaha Country Club years ago. Certain individuals who put dollars behind, weren't even allowed in the room, and we failed.
1 minute.
We missed out on opportunities to bring semiconductors. In fact, Senator McDonald had a bill last year for an additional $20 million for semiconductor research. These were all of the resources coming together to put us on a federal stage of leading the way in certain areas. But the champion of that cause was not allowed in the room. Multiple meetings we would hear about, oh, we met, and this person was in the room. We're going to do one application for the entire state. Okay, well, where's North Omaha at? Because there's already money dedicated there. From a federal government's perspective, we're leveraging the state's dollars. This is what they want to see in a grant. Nothing. Damn near every state around us is part of this map except for us. But we're okay with that. We could have turned 30 million into 300 million.
Time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Mr. Clerk, for an amendment.
Mr. President, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to amend by striking from proposed rule change 20, Rule 6, Section 6A, neither from the final sentence of subsection A.
Senator McCabe Cavanaugh, you are recognized to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, is it neither or neither? I guess I don't know, potato, potato, tomato, tomato. So I had introduced this amendment a few days ago, so I had to refresh my memory on it. If you recall me discussing what is time anymore, earlier this week, last week, who knows, about how rules debate is managed a little bit differently. You have to go back and look at the journal. So it's not posted online with today's agenda. So anyways, that's why I had to refresh myself. So I struck neither, although that's not really what I intended to do in further looking at this. It probably needs a different amendment, but it's kind of a follow-up to what Senator Conrad was talking about, which I don't think that there's an issue about having a motion to return a bill to select file to not be amendable or divisible, but the amendment itself, that's where we get into a bit of a sticky wicket, because we are giving the power to one individual to decide how that bill will be amended in its final version without the opportunity for anyone else to engage in the substantive conversation about how to change what they have put forward to create better public policy. So that's why I put in the neither, but the intention was just to allow for the actual select file amendment to be divisible and amendable, because that's what we do and that is our job. It is our job to work collaboratively. Sometimes we're better at it than others, myself included, but our job is to work collaboratively to pass the best version possible of whatever policy we are trying to enact. And we cannot limit ourselves to exclude 48 others from participating in that collaboration at any point in debate. So I don't think that this amendment is particularly what we need, but I might leave it there for just a little bit, see if we can have some conversations about how to fix it. I did wonder, I know it's my opening, but can I ask somebody to yield to a question? Would Senator Wayne yield to a question?
Would Senator Wayne yield to a question?
Senator Wayne, would you yield to a question?
That's me.
Question.
Yes.
Thank you. I was listening to you talk the last time on the mic, and you were talking about how Senator McKinney wasn't even in the room when the money was being decided how it was going to be spent. And I just wondered if you knew who was in the room.
I don't know who was all in the room, and this is about applying for a national grant around tech hubs.
Okay.
I do know, I don't know everybody that was in the room, but I know the architect of the bill was not in the room.
And this was
right.
a state group, a group based in Nebraska?
Yeah, it was a couple, I think one senator there. Some people from DED, university, and some private industry.
And is there a way for us to ask and find out, or who do
You could probably ask DED, but that's just one grant. There's another grant called the Recompete Grant that Senator McKinney and I worked on for a long time. We weren't in that room either.
And who can I ask for?
I would say DED.
And based on who you've already stated would be in the rooms, I assume that these meetings would qualify for open meetings and open records?
Not open meetings unless Senator Linehan's bill passed that says that if you're a public person, but not right now. No, it wouldn't be open meetings, to answer your question.
So these are closed door meetings with some vague list of people who are deciding how tax dollars that we allocated are being spent?
No, well, let me clarify. We allocated tax dollars. We were applying for a federal grant for more money, and they were deciding how we were going to apply, who's going to apply, and where those things should go.
Where those dollars should go.
Right. But we miss out historically in Nebraska on probably $500 million a year, if not $1 billion a year, on just federal grants that we don't apply.
Right.
We don't apply for.
And aren't we actually in statute supposed to apply for those things?
Yes. I mean, you would think yes, but taxpayers are paying money to the federal government, so why wouldn't we want those tax dollars?
Oh, no, I 100% agree.
Right.
I just also thought that it was our law that we were to draw down all federal funds due to us.
That is one of the statutes, but we do not do that. And there's another one that
so we break our own law?
Yeah, we do all the time. And there was another one, I'll give you another example, Highway 75 that destroyed North Omaha. There was a grant Reconnect grant.
Yeah.
Senator McKinney and I had a bill, and then we talked to DOT about it. And I believe Senator McKinney has his light on. I believe them dollars ended up getting applied for at the federal level to go to Western Nebraska. But it was specifically, you could have tripled the amount for urban areas that were destroyed by interstates or highways was the overall goal. That's why it's called Reconnect, because they're trying to reconnect the communities. But no, we didn't apply for it, nor this
Senator
administration.
Bosselman, I think, I'm not entirely sure. He does have a bill that addresses some of the fact that we have zero oversight over the Department of Transportation, which is also problematic. But that is problematic that they are just applying for things that we have no say in what they're applying for.
Well, I mean, that's how we got in the Southwest Power Pool is the public entities, public power just decided they were going to go with Southwest Power Pool and bind us forever without giving the legislature or the governor a heads up on what they were doing.
How fun. What a history lesson.
And right across the street in Iowa is MISO, which is a different power pool. But we didn't have that conversation in this body. That was decided outside of us that binds us.
Okay.
Oh, there's going to be a lot we're going to talk about this year about pulling the wool back and letting people really see how, I don't know if I use the word corruption because I'm an attorney, but how bad these behind the closed doors deals are happening and how I finally understand Senator Chambers of why he didn't introduce bills and why he didn't try to bring hope to his community. I understand it now.
It's hard when you're trying to fight so many things, and fight is the right word.
100%.
We're trying to fight the injustice and the lack of transparency, and we are trying to fight back against the abuse of power and the misuse of funds and on and on and on. So I appreciate you bringing this up, and I will continue to listen to the conversation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh and Senator Wayne. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not sure where I'm at on this amendment, but you know for sure I definitely oppose this rule change. But just to continue the conversation about the tech hub thing, it's real interesting. You know, we passed the Innovation Hub Act, then we set aside $30 million to develop an innovation hub in North Omaha to help with small business growth and innovation, to try to change the perception and the economy in North Omaha for the better. Then last summer, we ended up at the White House and had conversations about this, and they looked at us straight in the face and said, "You're the only state that has committed dollars to this initiative. If you apply, you're more than likely to get it." But, you know, Nebraska just has to be Nebraska. And some days I ask myself, is like the simple language of this just the simple language of this? And, you know, I've thought about this a lot, and maybe if we were another complexion and did all this, none of this would have happened. I rarely raise that card, but I have no other way to think about it, because it feels like there's been a deliberate effort since last session to carve back everything we did and to screw it up. Look at LB 50, for example. We passed that bill like the last day of session last year. It was passed, no complaints, no arguments of it being unconstitutional. None of that came up in the debate. Then we get to the summer and we get an AG's opinion that LB 50 is unconstitutional. Then you have men and women sitting in the prison, emailing my office, their families calling my phone saying, "What's going on? I thought the law was going into effect." No, it's not going into effect. It's in the courts now because the parole board, what is she? Executive director, CEO, Ross Cotton, and the director of prisons, the new one, Rob Jeffries, submitted a question to the Attorney General asking for her opinion. And I'm not stupid, and this is not rocket science. You cannot look me straight in my eyes and tell me that Rob Jeffries and Ross Cotton didn't have a conversation with the governor's office before that question was asked. You cannot look me straight in my face and tell me that didn't happen. Why did he sign the bill, or why did that question get raised during debate last year? But back to this, and back to the whole North-South Omaha thing. And I've been speaking to community members, and it's like, what's going on? And I was like, all last year I kept saying, you know, there's a lot of people behind the scenes that are doing what they can to try to screw this up, make us look bad, and to try to get the money to them. And to date, that is probably going to happen, especially with the airport business part, unless we do something about it as a body. Because rich people who don't want to see communities like North Omaha be prosperous wants to hold us back. So we could be the charity case for them, so they could pass out fake awards every year, they could feel good about themselves. They're trying to hold this back. And you can't convince me otherwise, and I'll wait for you to try. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. See no other names in the queue. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to close on your amendment.
I will, since it's not what I wanted it to do, I will pull my amendment. Thank you.
Amendment is withdrawn. Still seeing no other names in the queue. Speaker Arch, you are recognized to close on amendment to permanent rules, proposed rule change 20, Rule 6, Section 6.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we are on proposed rule change 20, and this clarifies what we're going to be doing with select file and moving from final back to select. So I would appreciate a yes vote on rule change 20. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. The question before us is to amend to the permanent rules, proposed rule change 20, Rules 6, Section 6. All in favor, vote aye. All opposed, vote nay. Has everyone voted who wished to vote? Mr. Clerk, record.
32 ayes, 2 nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the proposed rule change.
The amendment carried. Mr. Clerk, any announcements?
Mr. President, some items. I've got a motion to re-reference Legislative Bill 1092 from Revenue to Judiciary from Senator Wayne. That'll be printed in the Journal. Additionally, notice committee hearing from the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. Mr. President, new bills.
Introduction of more bills.
Legislative Bill 1401, introduced by Senator Ballard. It's bill for enacting appropriations, appropriates federal funds to the Department of Transportation for motor vehicle transportation infrastructure and declares an emergency. Legislative Bill 1402, introduced by Senator Linehan. It's bill for enacting new appropriations, appropriates funds to the state treasurer for the purpose of providing grants to scholarship granting organizations and declares an emergency. Legislative Bill 1403, introduced by Senator Linehan, is bill for enacting revenue taxation and Section 77908, 773806, Section 777103, 04, 05, 06, 07, 08, and 7109. Change provisions to the Opportunity Scholarships Act, changes the use of credits under such act, harmonized provisions, repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1404, introduced by Senator Wayne, is a bill for enacting the Commission on African American Affairs, amend Section 812601, changes membership of the Commission, provides for quorum, repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1405, introduced by Senator Wayne, it's a bill for enacting the single-family housing, prohibits the purchase of single-family housing by certain entities. Legislative Bill 1406, introduced by Senator Sanders, bill for an act relating to the game law. Amends Section 37438, authorizes active duty military permits as a type of state park motor vehicle entry permit, and repeals the original section. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I would like to recognize in the North Balcony, Nebraska Cattlemen, Young Cattlemen's Group, 10 members from across the state of Nebraska, represented by Senator Ibach. Thank you. This will be last call for new bills. Mr. Speaker, for announcement.
Colleagues, just to remind what tomorrow's schedule is, we will meet at 9:30. We'll do check-in at 9:30. Governor is scheduled to speak to us at 10 o'clock. And so we'll have the state of the state tomorrow morning. I committed to the executive branch that we would adjourn prior to 4:30. They need to come in and set up for tomorrow's state of the state, so that will happen. And when we begin debate on rule changes, you see the agenda today. Rule 3, Senator Erdman's Rule 3 will be the first up on the agenda. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Mr. Clerk, new bills, new items.
Mr. President, new bills. Legislative Bill 1407, introduced by Senator Sanders. It's a bill for an act relating to military installation development and support fund. Amend sections 55901, sections 84612. Changes the name of and approved uses for the military installation development and support fund. Defines the term harmonized provisions, repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1408, introduced by Senator Sanders. It's a bill for an act relating to human trafficking, amends sections 811431, section 811430. Change provisions relating to the Human Trafficking Task Force and training on human trafficking. Requires hotels to have a policy relating to human trafficking. Requires hotel employees to receive training on human trafficking as prescribed. Limits the liability of hotel owners, operators, and employees relating to human trafficking committed by a third party. Provides powers and duties of the Department of Labor and other state agencies, and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1409, introduced by Senator Bostar, is a bill for an act relating to real property. Amends section 76856. Change of provision relating to the Nebraska Condominium Act and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1410, introduced by Senator Linehan at the request of the governor. It's a bill for an act relating to the Imagine Nebraska Act. Amends section 776831, 776832. Change of provisions relating to tax incentives and the use of tax incentives. Repeals the original section, declares an emergency. Legislative Bill 1411, introduced by Senator Clements, bill for an act relating to appropriations. Appropriates federal funds to the Department of Transportation. New LR 287CA, introduced by Senator John Kavanaugh. constitutional amendment requiring the state to compensate political subdivisions for any locally imposed revenue source that is reduced or eliminated by the legislature. Amendment to be printed from Senator Frederickson to LB 929. Report from the Urban Affairs Committee reporting Legislative Bill 164 to general file with committee amendments. The Education Committee will be having an executive session Thursday, January 18th, 2024 at 1:10 under the north balcony. Education executive session under the north balcony at 1:10. Name ads, Senator Kyle to LB 16, Senator Brewer to LB 51, 853, Boston 864, Holleran 872, Conrad, Meyer, Ballard, Boston, Ibaugh, all to 876, Senator Holleran to LB 878 and 883, Senator Holcroft also 883, Senator Blood to LB 886, Holleran 895, Brewer, Holleran both to 925, Senator Holleran also to 934, Senator Conrad 945, Senator Holleran to 953 and 54, Senator Conrad to LB 959, Senator Brewer to LB 974, Senator Conrad 976, Senator Merman 1003, Senator Holleran 1004, 1027, 1034, and 1035, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to LB 1050, Senator Holleran to 1060, Senator Slama 1067, Senator Conrad 1089, Senator Holleran 1111, Senator Brewer 1243, Senator Holcroft LB 1260, Senator Holleran 1297 and 1299, Senator Hansen 1301, Senator Holcroft, Lippincott, Brandt, Kauth, McDonald, Dorn, Linehan, Von Gillern, Jacobson, Aguilar, Holleran, all to LB 1301 as well. Senator Holcroft to LB 1368, Senator Holleran to LR 277CA and LR 278CA. Finally, Mr. President, a priority motion. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to adjourn the body until Thursday, January 18th, 2024 at 9:30 a.m.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. There's a motion by Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. We are adjourned.